Hello again. We're back for more interviews with IGDN members, and I've got Mark Richardson here from Ottawa, Canada. And Mark, say hello.
Hi.
So I have been doing these interviews, and I talked to two other people from Ottawa, and they
Uh-oh.
both recommended you
Uh-oh.
as like I was like, "What's a local person that you want to give a shout out to?" And they're like, "Mark Richardson, Headspace." So then I'm
All
like,
right.
"Well, now I
Okay. So
I
you,
don't
you definitely talked to Jason then. I
I
know. I'm
did talk to
fairly
Jason. I also
certain.
talked to Jim Davies, so they'll be
Okay,
in this
okay.
series as well. But they both mentioned you and your game Headspace, so I wanted to get you on and have you tell us what Headspace is.
Okay. Yeah, so my name's Mark Richardson. I run a small indie press kind of thing called Green Hat Designs. I got into game design, I guess, geez, like 2015, 2016 kind of thing. Jason Pitt is actually the reason I'm doing these kinds of things is he and I worked in the same government department down the hall from each other, and we would talk about games, and then we started talking about game design, and he was really big into actually like doing it, and I was like, that'd be kind of neat. I've never done that before. And then I went to Gen Con of all places, and I was at Gen Con I don't know, maybe 2016 or something. And I was doing one of those hangouts at the God, which hotel was that? Anyway, it was one
Eh,
of those hotels, and
yeah.
we were all hanging around. It was like 2 in the morning, as Gen Con is like to do. And I was there with Tracy, Eloy LaSanta was there,
Mhm.
and a
I know
few other
Eloy.
people who would be at various times pretty prominent in the IGDN.
Hmm.
I don't know if the IGDN existed then. I can't really remember. But anyway, so they were all hanging out and we were talking like games and game design. And I was not a game designer. I would certainly have not identified as a game designer. It was my first Gen Con. I was like having fun and playing stuff. And the topic of game design came up inevitably, and people had different ideas people were working on. And I said, oh, well, like I've had an idea kind of thing. And then Eloy LaSanta was like, okay, Mark, pitch it to us.
Yeah.
And these are people who I knew who had published books and all this other stuff. So like my brain literally like freezes for a moment. But then I was like, okay, I'll give you the pitch. And it
Yeah.
was because I did one of those the annual game design kind of from term of the game competition or what it's called. But I mean, I made a game and it wasn't good, like it was really bad, right? But the core idea was this idea of shared skills and knowledge and stuff like this, and a book that I really identify with. Like, so it's interesting. So I ended up writing a game called Headspace. Ta-da! I did find the book in my house, and it's a shared consciousness cyberpunk kind of story. And it's interesting because a lot of people think that this material and my connection to it came through um, the Netflix show, which has a sort of a similar kind of vein of people who
You're talking about Sense8?
share. Yeah, Sense8. Yeah, and like I have not watched Sense8. I kind of actually, even once I became aware of it, I would like purposely avoided it because I didn't want to give myself any sort of creative baggage that would be
Sure.
like, here's my idea stolen from the mind of JMS, because fans love that one. Um,
Right.
like for me, I read Chrysalids, really a John Wyndham book from a long ass time ago, and in it there's a bunch of children who are like running away from people, and they have telepathy. And I was always like really in there. I was like, well, what if you played in a game where you were stuck in the heads of the other players and like you don't have a choice in the matter? Because like telepathy, when it's just like, hi, here's my idea, is great. Like I want to tell you about something. But if I can't turn the telepathy off, like I suddenly have no privacy with another individual
Sure.
ever. And I was like, well, that's a cool idea for a role playing game. And then it kind of built up where I was like, well, let's make like what kinds of things would you be able to share if you had this permanent, connection? And
Right.
so in Headspace, basically, it is very much like it's a cyberpunk game, but it's very hard coded as you against the corporations. This is not the game where you are going to play a bunch of people doing hits for some company. The
Right.
game is very, very clear that you are essentially the bleeding edge of the Jason Bournes of this dying universe, and you have sort of essentially, you are all like, the game is hard coded that you're hyper competent. Like the dice rolls are
Mm,
mostly about the degree of success and the complications you might have. They are
yeah.
not about, they are very rarely about absolute failure. A whole lot of carnage might happen while you're running across here with your sword and fighting these guys with Uzis, but whether or not you kill them is probably not in question.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
like that
so
as a storytelling thing. Like you said, it's highly competent. The characters are highly competent. They're going to succeed, but like, how much mess are they going to
at
make?
what cost will they
Yeah,
succeed,
yeah.
like personally or emotionally in this particular game? And so essentially what happens with Headspace is, if you picture, like, you have a whole group of people who are like these Jason Bournes and of various fields, right? The hacker and the
The
street
classic
samurai and
party.
so on and so forth, right? Like tech guy and all this stuff, right? The
Mhm.
classic party. And so essentially they realize they're only one person, though. Like, they can't be a one person, like John Wick, he can give it, like, no one's really John Wick in this game. But like, if the problem John Wick has is he's only one person and he only has one set of skills. Like, he's really good at killing people, but if he had to hack past his door, he's doomed. Like, suddenly
Right.
John Wick's like, I can't shoot the door open, I guess I'm dead.
Just
And
stab it with a
so
pencil really hard.
yeah, exactly. And so what happens in Headspace is the characters all get this technology that's super experimental, and in most cases in this universe, it doesn't work. Except for them, it does, and it creates a permanent, unclosable, essentially Wi-Fi bridge between all of the various characters' minds, no matter where they are. It's essentially like, the conceit of the game is, this is the technology that is indistinguishable from magic.
Sure.
Um, and essentially, the big problem is it can't turn off. And so why would you do this is, well, I'm hyper competent at everything I do and you're like badass at everything you do. We get this technology, all of your skills, I know how to do them at the same level of ability as you do. The problem is that when I want to grab one of your skills from your mind, I don't have a problem. So one of the things that about this game that I really wanted to avoid is actually a problem that Sense8 has. Sense8 exploits this for drama, but I don't want this in my game, and that's,
Hmm.
I don't want to violate player agency between players, right? So the problem, like, Sense8 is cool because I can literally inhabit your body and make you do things. That is incredibly creepy and very boundary breaking in a role playing game, and I don't
Yeah.
want that. And
Right.
so this game is about, I take a skill from you, and what happens is, in this game, you don't have, your primary attributes are not physical attributes, because we don't care. Your character's really good. Like, if it
Hmm.
really comes up to it, we'd be like, can you do a push-up? Probably, right? This game isn't about that. So in this game, you have a core pool of emotional attributes. And so like, what would be, so like, you could have essentially, so you have like rage, grief, fear, need, and ego. And
Yeah.
there is actually, when you play the game, there's a map that you can print off and put on the table, and it represents the level of these various emotions in the shared consciousness of the group. And as people do things, so if I'm in a scene and I get really angry, my rage actually bleeds off into the shared consciousness that we have. So we
Okay.
all get a little bit more angry, kind of thing.
Right.
And you can represent that. It largely, when the scales go up and down in the game, it's more about showing, like, giving role playing hints and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they each of these things have a cap where if they hit, that emotion kind of explodes into the scene, and it actually forces, it's like, it essentially provides various prompts that players will have to use in the scene, where they, like, you were going to solve this problem, but now you have to solve this problem,
In an angry
and
way.
in an angry way, or in a
Yeah.
fearful way, or something like that,
Yeah.
or essentially with a fearful complication, right?
Sure.
So the complications in this game are all about emotional complications, and the reason why, how this works is that if you're, each character has 3 skills that they are absurdly, unmistakably Jason Bourne kick ass in. If
Right.
you're using one of your skills to solve a problem, basically you basically don't even really roll the dice most of the time. You pretty well just say I do it,
Hmm.
and you tell us what happens, and that's about it. But when you use another player's skill, so like each of us have, like during character creation, we go through a process where we define the emotional baggage of each of our skills based on our own life experiences. They could be daddy issues, they could be anything. So if I have firearms and my emotional baggage is anger, well, for me, when I use my firearms, I've dealt with my baggage. So this does not cause me any problems. I can just murder everybody around me, and that's okay.
Mm.
But as I murder everybody around me, my anger that's back in the back of my mind will kind of bleed off into the shared space and tap up for everybody else that's who's hanging out with me. The problem is that if I want to go grab, like, let's say another player is in, so the tech doesn't, he can't shoot guns, but he can hack everything. But he's cornered into a hallway and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna take Bob's firearm skill, because Bob is literally John Wick.
Right.
So I'm gonna use Bob's firearms to pull out an Uzi and kill the 3 guys down the hall. Okay, so you say you're going to do this, so you use his skill. No one's in question that you're going to murder these guys, probably. But what happens is you also pull the emotional baggage that Bob has into your scene. So you'll roll the dice, and the dice, it's basically, what happens is that it's been a while since I've explained this, but
No,
essentially,
you're doing great.
in a nutshell, the emotion, let's say, is anger, and so anger has a whole bunch of potential complications, and none of these may affect you. Basically, your character has ratings and all of the emotional attributes because it's a PBTA game, but it's a heavily it functions
You
differently than a lot of
you've
PBTA games.
hacked it a
I've
lot.
hacked it a lot. So, like, you have a plus or minus in rage, which represents your character's personal control of their anger. So a positive rating in rage means that you you have control of this emotion. It does not get the better of you. A 0 means you're kind of like everybody else. And
Yeah.
a negative means you have some anger management issues, you know? And so let's say you had a -1. So you would roll the dice, and you would roll the dice, because I'm using a rage-based skill, and it doesn't matter who it's coming from, but the skill is rage-based. So I'm going to roll my dice and add or subtract rage. And let's say if I get high, then I can act without complication in the scene, and essentially I grab his skill and do whatever the heck I want.
Right. Right.
But if I roll low, essentially here to give, it'll be at the back.
Well, it sounds like it's the thing you were talking about. Like, you're going to still succeed, but it's going to be at a greater cost because
Yeah.
you're
So
not used to
essentially 10
Bob's
plus
bottled up
10. So
emotions.
like 10 plus, you succeed without emotional complications. 7 to 9, you succeed, but you pick one emotional complication based on the baggage of the skill. So for example, with rage, you ignore something obvious, you inflict collateral damage, you provoke a new conflict, you use excessive force. And then 6-, you still succeed. So this is the thing, you're not allowed to fail in this game, or very rarely. So at 6-, you succeed, but you pick 2 emotional complications based on the baggage, or you can reveal a deep regret that your character has, and it creates a big scene in the game. But so if you think about it, like, if you really blow out a roll, like, I have to kill the 3 guys, so I've declared I'm using my Uzi and John Wick skills to kill the 3 guys down the hallway. So if you ace your roll, you would just be like, describe a scene of you, like, you know, paff, 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 headshots all around. I slide under the table, and I disable the security alarm before anything happens. Okay, well, let's say I succeeded but 1. Okay, so my declaration was still murdering these guys with firearms, so that's going to happen. But you know what? This looks fun. I'm going to ignore something obvious. So maybe I'm in such a rage because of this anger that, like, I, you know, paff, 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 I kill these guys, I slide through, and I disable the door mechanism that we all needed to get past for the next area. But I didn't see that one of these guys had, like, a crucial piece of technology I needed, or maybe there was an alarm one of these guys hits or something like that. And then like maybe if I had a second one, use excessive force is always a fun one. So it's like, it creates collateral complications, windows are breaking, citizens, innocent people get killed or who knows what, right?
Right.
And so when you use other people's skills, these complications come running into your scene, and you have to kind of create. The players are just given free reign to be like, what do you want to do? Listen, you get this prompt, you have to bring it into your scene, you have to do it right now, and we go to the next person. So it's a very fluid kind of game. If you use your own skill, basically, which is called a professional move, essentially you say what you want to do and you do it. And then you increase the tracks. So basically, if other people use their skills, the tracks go up. And essentially, when the tracks explode, they cause large, like everybody in the party gets like an emotional complication based on that skill, irrelevant of basically that just goes into the scene they're in. So, and sometimes it can be really weird because you could be like in a social scene and you get a rage complication and you're like, well, that seems weird maybe, but like, you can go like, okay, inflict collateral damage can mean a lot of things in a social confrontation where you're
Sure.
trying to convince people to say, let your friends into the bar, but now I actually have managed to somehow like irritate the mob into thinking that I was the one who
Right,
did
right.
something about them, right? So essentially the player's own actions in the game create this sort of massive kind of uncontrollable snowball. And then and so and I guess like another way that the game really like one of the things that this was my first game, and I worked on it for about 3 years. I did a Kickstarter campaign after doing 3 years of like an absurd number of play tests and developed. I probably overdeveloped it because it was like my first game.
Yeah.
And then I ran a Kickstarter. I made about 30,000, enough to do an offset print run of the core book. I had a giant printing shipping fiasco, which is arguably a legendary within the community because, as most people have said it, like if you've been in the industry long enough, things go wrong.
Sure.
And
Sometimes you have a print run or a shipping disaster.
exactly, right. And a friend of mine was like, I've never seen all of these things go so wrong for one person the first time out, And
Mm.
basically, the short version is, I had the books printed in Canada and with a reliable local printer who also didn't know what they were doing with shipping. And so the books arrived to my distributor in the US more or less in tatters. And
Mm.
they did this twice.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
it was
That's
pretty epic. It was pretty
that.
epic. And I mean, obviously, like exhausting. But I learned a lot in the process. And like the main thing I learned, like from my Kickstarter experience, was be brutally honest with your backers.
Sure.
Like the week it happened, like after 2 days of like crying and trying to figure out what to do, I'm like, all right, well, this is what happened. And so I
Right.
shared videos of them unpacking the boxes and just like, I still have the videos. It's pretty horrifying. For anyone who's ever made a book, it's a horrifying video to watch.
Oh,
Um, and and then I just said, hey, well, I'm gonna work with the printer, we'll figure it out, we'll print more and we'll do it. And
right.
like that's generally what I've noticed even since then for all of the sort of various disasters I have seen in Kickstarter history. The difference between disaster and I hate you and I'm never buying your game again is transparency. nine
That's
times nine times out of 10 is
yeah.
is it your house can burn down. Like as a guy who bought your book, if travesty and tragedy hits your life, I am sympathetic. But if
Sure.
you don't tell me, how
Then
am
you
I
don't
supposed to care?
you don't know.
And that's the thing. And it's like I've seen plenty of people who they just don't share because it's so like this is terrible. The books are going to be delayed by 6 months, and so they just go silent. And like that's when people get angry, like and so yeah, I didn't have too many. I don't think I ever had any real issues with it once it got into rollout and that kind of thing. I printed about 1,000 books at this point. As far as I know, I've sold them all, or they're out there and I don't know where they are at this point. Which was, I feel like, really a spectacular success to have printed 1,000 books and over the course of about 4 or 5 years be done with them. And
Yeah.
I had about 300 backers at a print level. And then I got enough in the part of the, stretch goals that haunt you.
Right, right.
So essentially I have in the core Headspace book there are two settings. Basically, character creation in Headspace is like a 4-hour journey, but it's really cool where you
It's like
work
a
with the
session
other
zero.
characters. Yeah, the session zero is really all about let's define the emotional baggage and connective history between all of our
Sure,
professionals.
because that's so
And
important. Sounds
yeah,
like to the
exactly,
game.
right? Because like and when I do con games, it seems weird, but I do the full character creation because I find like when I do full pre-gens and just put them down on the table, the game feels very flat because you don't have any
Hmm.
understanding as to like, well, like it's just he has anger problems and it's very oversimplified as opposed to like, well, I know his anger comes from the fact that he lost a child to company X, that I worked for at the time.
Right.
And maybe I'm even responsible for his grief, or something like that, right? Or like, and also what happens too is like one person's emotional history becomes my emotional history because like maybe I was actually the guy that did this. And like character creation, like your characters are not pitched against each other. Like we've all agreed at the table that we will be
You
a team at the end of this, but in our career as the John Wicks of the universe, we maybe have crossed swords and not necessarily in a good way.
sure.
And so
That's
you end up with kind of a collective heap of damaged goods, basically, is what the party is. Um, yeah, and it's a lot of fun. But there's also part of the system is also like it generates essentially a cyberpunk dystopia that's on the verge of breaking,
right.
and your characters are like pitched against the companies. So like there's
So
some tool. Yeah, so
no,
I'm going on a big
you
range.
are.
I
I
haven't
want to make
talked
sure we
about
get
this.
to some other things.
Yeah, I haven't talked about this game in a while. So
You've
anyway,
very thoroughly
so I
described the
did.
game, and I've flipped through it. I've looked at it. I'm excited to try it out sometime, and I even more now that I've talked to you. But I do want to cover some other things. This
Yeah,
is
sure.
something
Yeah,
that
like
you
totally
have.
shut me up. This is my ADHD brain being like, let me talk about a topic.
Well, so I want to ask you about at least because it's on the wall behind you. There's a plaque that you won an
Uh-oh.
ENnie for cartography.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of your other half of game life is you make maps for games. So tell
Yeah,
us a little bit about that. What?
sure. So like my day job is not I don't write books for a living. I'm not a writer. I would not even like up until having written this book. My editor always reminds me, "Mark, you wrote a book. Shut up. You're a writer. Done." I'm like, "Oh, okay, fine." But like my actual professional career is as a cartographer. I've spent about 20 something years in the GIS geospatial field. It's my jam, and I've spent most of it making visual products for government, which is mostly like explaining highly complex environmental science on a map sheet,
Right.
And when I started to get into game design, I ended up inevitably in conversations of like, hey, what do you do for a living? Right. And I'm like, oh, I make maps. And they're like, have you ever thought about making a map for a game? And I'm like,
You were just telling me before we had a little audio hiccup there that the the Kickstarter blew up and you got to make a big
yeah,
map.
and then we're like, hey, you want to make a bunch of posters? Oh, by the way, like me talking over time is probably the most on-brand Mark Richardson thing ever. So I'm sure all of my Canadian friends, or actually anyone who knows me, will just laugh when they hear that. Um, yeah, so the Kickstarter blew up, and then they were like, hey, do you want to make posters of like the whole bloody world? And I was like, okay. And that would start like a 2-hour, a 2-year journey of making maps. They turned out really well. Like yeah, I got like so this is the 7th CRPG, and then that was
Hey, looks like a
the
map.
main. This looks like a map. So this one and because it was like the first kind of thing I worked on where the fan base is kind of absurd, right? And so and yeah, like I ended up getting a silver ENnie for cartography, which was kind of wild. To lose out to Chaosium is pretty good gig as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, and then that kind of I did that work for a long time, and then it's kind of like I don't do a lot of mapping work because like my day job's pretty busy. So I kind of do like one contract at a time. It's really more for fun than it is like the skills to pay the software bills, but that's about it. Yeah, so right now I'm working on the Blue Planet second edition. I'm doing like 8 maps for that. That's like so into my wheelhouse, it's not even funny. Because it's like a science fiction RPG. So it's like, hey, I'll draw everything from scratch in a GIS and render your world. And it's
Did
taken a stupid.
you like making coastlines and
Oh
or
yeah, I'm
mountains?
doing every. I did so
What's your
like
favorite thing to do a map of that way?
Um, so the thing that I really enjoyed with this whole process is I experimented with making elevation models like fictionally. And eventually like I just drew essentially topo lines. I tried a couple other methods, they didn't really work. So not only did I draw like all the coastlines, but like I then drew like it's a water world kind of game where it's all
Yeah,
about undersea exploration. So there's very little to the actual islands. Like it's like there's a couple archipelagos where there's a whole bunch of big cities, and that's it. And then the rest of the world is water. So the way you make that interesting on a map is, well, it's going to have underwater mountains and
right.
canyons and all this other stuff, and that
So did
has
you
to
get to map all
pop
that
pop,
stuff too?
right? Yeah. So then I drew it all in sort of a topographic style, and then I used fancy computer stuff to convert these simple lines into 3-dimensional objects and made like hillshade renders and stuff. So it looks really, really cool. And I pretty well pulled out all the stops for that one. So like I do my base drawing in my GIS software, and then I bring out all of the various components into Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop where I sort of composite it together and stuff like that. So it's like 20 years of doing it in the field has let me do this stuff in a vaguely
Sure,
efficient way.
that's the you don't pay for your time, you pay for your experience or whatever.
Yeah, so it's been super fun. I've really enjoyed that. I don't know what I'm doing after I get this thing done. Probably take a break. But yeah, I have about 8 maps that I'm doing, like various sort of archipelagos. I have one thing which is the globe, and then I'm doing like one doing like an undersea research base. I'm doing like a city that's floating on the ocean. And like one like the capital city that's like on an island kind of thing. And so yeah, it's been pretty cool. I think 5 of the 8 or 9 maps are in like a submitted draft state with a publisher, and I
All
have a
right.
few little things to finish. So that'll eventually come to a close, and I've been during COVID, I found that I think everybody has had different experiences with what they do and interact with the
Sure.
community. For me, like a lot of my community interaction was through conventions, and like the game design process wasn't working. Not being at cons. I designed a card based crew based World War II tank game, and I've struggled with it so badly over the course of years after Headspace. Like it was such a big departure. Like, hey, let's make a card game about World War II tank crews. What
Yeah.
could possibly go wrong? Um, and I loved the experience, but like I just got to a point where I'm like, I can't figure out the way forward for this.
Mm.
Um, and then COVID happened, and I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna do mapping for now. So yeah, I've taken a bit of a break from my game design brain, and I'm mostly putting my energy into mapping because that's something I can do without having to engage in convention spaces and that kind of thing. For my books that I have done, so like I did an expansion for Headspace, which is all a bunch of cool fictional settings written by different people in the TTRPG community. Like Will Heinmark did something, and Emily Care Boss, and Hamish Cameron, and that kind of thing. And so they're all like they're really good. Honestly, they're really good, even if you never play Headspace, because I went kind of nuts. And so, like, there's all sorts of corporate logos and fake fictional companies. Like, there's about like 50 or 60 companies of like dystopias, and of course, like, I'm incapable of not making maps for my own
Is there a map
games.
in there?
Yeah, well, there's like one map for each of them. So, you know, I did like, there's like the polar city kind of thing and stuff like that.
Okay.
So there's always something going on with maps for me.
Sure.
Um,
So
yeah, and so the at this point, like the print books are all print on demand from drive-through. So people can get the PDF of either book, and the POD version of either book there, and that's where they're available.
yeah, that's what I was going to kind of transition into, telling us your where people can, if they need a map, like after you, if they want to reach out to you. We talked a little bit before we started recording about like the sort of the
the
now that people have
ongoing.
watched this video, you're in their brain, and when they get ready for a map, how do they get a hold of you?
The best and easiest way, at least for now anyway, until it may implode, I don't know, is Twitter. I kind of that's my hang space. And I talk a lot about I talk a lot about mental health issues. I talk a lot about which I struggle with as a person who's a designer and things like that. And I talk a lot about cartography and game design there as well. I'm at Slave to the Hat, and that's probably the best place to find me. I also have my email, which is, people can shoot me a note and say, like, I don't, I would point out for map stuff, like I don't do, I'm only really working because I don't do a lot of map work. These days I lean towards where I would be best suited. So modern games or historical settings, which are using kind of modernish kind of looks.
Yeah.
And then I don't like, I've never done any, like, people's personal campaigns and that kind of thing. It's usually a great deal of work. So I generally aim for doing like something for a book or something that
Yeah.
I prefer to work for something that's in the publishing path. So because it's more fun.
Sure.
And yeah,
Awesome.
that's
And your
probably
books
the
are
best
on
way.
drive through and
My
under
books, yeah.
Green
So
Hat
my books are
Designs,
Headspace.
and
You just look at Headspace and Drive Through, and you can find stuff there. And my maps. I'm trying to figure out a way of doing the maps that I have done as like prints through I don't want to have to print them at home and mail them. That's just like a
yeah,
realm I don't want to go into. So I keep trying to find like what would be a good
like
place that would let
like a
me kind of
third
do that.
party poster
Yeah, like a
printing
third
type place
party,
that you could
like this is the
order.
map I want, click, and then they just do everything,
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's on my plan. It's one of my, I think once I finish Blue Planet, I want to figure out how to set that all in motion. Especially because when I was working on Blue Planet, that was one of the things that I wanted to do for the product was, hey, these maps are going to go in your game, but it'd be great if I could, like, then sell a print later. And they were like, sure, great, do that. And I haven't really done that a lot with my work. A lot of my work, and I mean, it's for a lot of times I do work for indie stuff, and most indie authors will want to try to maintain art rights, and I don't blame them. So
Sure.
yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah. Mark, thank you so much for your time today and talking to me about all the things you do, and talking about your game. And I wish you every success in the continued success in your chosen industry.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. We've got any other final departing words for the viewers?
Um, Always hire a good editor.
Oh,
If you
that is
don't
good
have an
advice.
editor, if you're a TTRPG writer and you don't have an editor, or you're not thinking of getting an editor, you're a fool. Um, I have no, that's the kindest word I could use. There's no way, like, it's just not happening. And then I guess maybe the other thing I would say probably, and this is more just because I have a lot of friends who are in different parts of the industry, is like as a white dude in this industry, like if you're going to write certain games, hire some of the people who are in those in communities or adjacent communities to like look over your content and find out if you're
Yeah.
being a giant tool, because that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I'm mostly I'm excited to like work with other creators and stuff like that. I always like to see what other people are doing and try something new. So yeah.
All right. Well, again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the interwebs.
All
Maybe
right.
at a con someday soon.
Yeah, hopefully. I don't
Fingers
know.
crossed.
Yeah, like I've been really uncomfortable with it. Like my wife works at a hospital, so like it's much more complicated if she gets COVID than it
Sure.
is if I do. And so I've been very leery of convention attendance, but
Yeah.
we'll see what happens in the future.
In the future. All right. To the future till
Thanks,
we're
Matt.
all hacked together in one giant cyber organism. Uh, all right.